Well, first Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired. Sup, Holmes?
Beware, your host, Jonathan Holmes.
Thank you, Sinistar, for welcoming me. I feel that I hear the sound of sparkles and magic. Maybe it's because Marcus Lindblom is here. Did I pronounce your name, Marcus Lindblom?
Yeah. Lindblom. It's all the same.
How do you know how to pronounce it? Who do you trust on that? Who do you go to?
Well, my grandfather, who was born in Sweden, said it was Lindblom, but I think there's technically sort of it's almost like an umlauted O kind of a thing where it's so it can be Lindblom or Lindblom. I mean, it's same kind of thing. Like I said, I don't really get bothered by how it's pronounced too much.
So from day one, you've had to learn to be flexible, even on your own pronunciation of your last name. And from conversation we were having before the show started, you have been very flexible. You've been in this industry for how many years now?
So I've been working on games for about 20 years.
Wow.
So I started at Nintendo in 1990, but I actually started in their customer service area because I was going to school, and it was a great way to have a decent job that paid well and also go to school during the day, because I worked early in the morning for the East Coast guys and would answer phone calls and stuff like that. I did that for probably a year and a half, typical kind of stuff, and I did some gameplay calls too. So I would answer people's questions about how to play, certain games, and then I got into the correspondence area where I did a lot of it was all answering letters and things like that.
So like Nintendo or Nintendo Power or Club Nintendo, or where's
it was just
Nintendo?
At that time? It was Nintendo. So anybody that wrote in, like for example, we would get all the letters that kids that had ideas, and they would send them in to us. People that had suggestions, or if they had problems and stuff like that, and they wrote in, we would deal with all that kind of thing. So it was the correspondence department, and then from there I moved into the game group area, and it was in the game group that I started working on, the job was essentially like an assistant producer job, I guess, in some ways, or associate producer job, I guess. It was mostly writing manuals, box copy, the stuff that would go on the box. But then, in some cases, because the games were made in Japan, the on-screen text there wasn't usually much of it. So the work was, fairly light for doing in-game translation work until I got to Earthbound. So.
Right.
So that was the first real big, huge project I worked on that had a lot of writing, and and so even to this day, I'm sort of shocked that it's held up as well as it has. But yeah, so that's where I started. So that was literally 20 years ago, because I started working on the Earthbound stuff. Would have been about, I guess it's 19 years ago today-ish, kind of like right around this time was when I started working on it in 90. Well, let me think a minute. Came out in 95, so it would have been like the end of 94, so this is the 90, so 19 years ago I started working on actually the translation work right around now. And I'd been in the game group for about a year.
Gotcha. Do you remember any of the manuals or back of boxes you might have written that I could be familiar with?
Well, so the first project I did was a game called Wario's Woods, which was a puzzle game. It was the last... and this is the thing that's kind of fun about it that I like, is I got the last NES game that Nintendo published themselves. And so it was the final NES, and I could say that I did work on an NES game. And so, that's kind of a nice thing. And there was a Super NES version too. But yeah, I wrote the manual for that and did the box copy and stuff. And then a little bit of in-game translation work, which was pretty minor because there was so little text in that game.
Sure. It was code dropping bombs on things.
Yeah.
While you're making faces at them.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, simple little game, but actually quite a bit of fun. I actually liked it a lot.
Yeah, me too. It was one of the first. I think it's the only single-player game where Toad is playable that I could think of.
Probably.
It's kind of Toad's game, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Were you a big fan of Nintendo before that, or video games before that, or how did you end up falling into that, or moving towards that?
Well, so I had lived in Japan for 4 years, from 86 to 90. And so I had, become familiar with Nintendo, of course, through arcade games and stuff over there, as well as the Famicom, which I had played some. I didn't own a Famicom when I was there, but I had played it with friends a few times and seen it. But I played games in the arcades quite a bit. I was fortunate because my wife is half Japanese, and so I could be an English tutor without having to teach at a school, and because I had a work visa. Which was very nice. And so I got to set my own hours, and so I would only end up working like 3 hours a day because I would do a lot of stuff in the evenings and things. And so I had a ton of time to be able to kind of go where I wanted during the day, and so I'd pick a part of Tokyo I wanted to go see that I hadn't been to, travel, look at the sights a bit, and then I'd end up eventually in an arcade and sit and play for a while. So I played a lot of arcade games. So I knew a lot about Nintendo, when I came back, and when I saw that they had jobs available, and I thought, well, I'm a gamer at heart. I mean, I'd grown up though with board games as well as really early video games. I played a lot of stuff when arcades were big here, and then I decided, it just would be a great place to work as a gamer to have a job, and so I went ahead and did that, and at the end of the day, it worked out great. I mean, I told myself when I was graduating, getting my degree, because I had taken the 4 years off while I went to Japan because I had started in the early '80s. When I came back and got my degree, I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do, and I told myself if I get into the games group, well, maybe I'll try to turn that into a career. But before that, I had other things I thought I would do for a career, but luckily, a position opened up, and they asked if I was interested, and because I knew a couple of guys in the games group, and so I ended up getting the job, and from there, it's turned into a 20-year career.
It's incredible. How did it feel when you went from Wario's Woods to something like Mother 2 or Earthbound? And how did the Earthbound name come about as well? Those are a couple, double-ended question. Excited.
Yeah. Well, so a lot of that kind of stuff was decided, I think, well in advance of me starting to work on the game. The marketing group or someone had come up with the game with the name, and I think that and there are people out there that'll probably go crazy because I don't know this off the top of my head, but I suspect that Earthbound might have been the name that they were going to call Mother 1 in the U.S. or Earthbound 0, whatever they want to call it now. But that original NES version, which had gotten translated and everything like that, but was never released, I think was going to originally be called Earthbound, and then when they switched over to the Super NES version, they just left it as is, and so Earthbound was the name that was pretty well gonna stick, I think, the whole time I worked on it. I came into the project, it shipped in June of '95, and I really started working on it, pretty much. I was told about working on it, I think, right at the end of '94 and started really working on it at the beginning of '95. So there was about a 3-month window of doing all the work. So I did a lot of the translation work from January through March of '95.
Wow. And then not just translation, but localization in having to create new objects that would translate better to the American culture and changing some of the graphics.
Yeah, and yeah, there were changes to the graphics and stuff. And the one thing I do want to make sure is clear is that it really was more of a localization effort on my part. We did have there was a woman on staff named Keiko Tamura, and Keiko did sort of a big rough translation of all of the text that was not translated over. And from there, I would take it and rewrite it or, do whatever to make it so that it would fit with, the game in for the North American market. And sometimes, like you said, that was rewriting jokes or, just sometimes having to make some fairly big changes just to get it to be a little more appropriate, I guess, for our market. And so we did that over those 3 months, like I said. So Keiko did kind of a big pass over everything. And then I worked with a guy from the developer in Japan, and his name was Masayuki Miura. And Miura-san and I would sit and just go through line by line just to make sure that what they had put in was going to work for the U.S. market. And he was able to tell me a lot of the background of the lines, and he would give me a good description about what was going on, because for some certain portion of the time that I was working on it, for quite a bit of it, I couldn't actually even play builds because, like you said, they were changing graphics out. They were taking out things like the religious references, and they were taking out anything that had alcohol references and things like that. So we were pulling that, and so consequently the game wasn't playable for a good while. So we would look at a line, and he would try to tell me what was going on, and I'd try to understand what was being seen on screen, and then write based on that. But I got really lucky to do this, and in some ways lucky to do it in that way because, and I've told some other people this, that the game itself is meant to be kind of quirky and kind of unusual, and I think this ended up being a huge saving grace for me because some of the oddities that came through, because I necessarily didn't know what was on screen, ended up being okay. I got lucky that they played as well as they did when they probably should have been, it probably should have been looked at as, all right, that didn't fit right. So, because like when I look at stuff in the game today, there's things that I just think are just, I can't believe we didn't fix it or something.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I played through it not that long ago, and I'm still taken aback by all the little details. There's one of the last dungeons I was in, there's just a door, and you go to it, and the guy's like, "Oh, don't come in here, I'm pooping," or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm just like, awesome,
Yeah.
awesome,
Well,
that guy's in there. And you got to do that. You were,
Yeah.
And was
Yeah.
that kind of stuff most often in the original script, or was a lot of that style added by you and by the rest of the team?
Well, Itoi-san's writing really was interesting and quirky in a lot of those ways. And so he, the thing that I got to do was take some of the phraseology, I guess, that he used, and what I ended up doing in the English version, because they were so much more conscious of the ratings, well, it wasn't necessarily ratings because we didn't really have ratings in those days, but just the image, right? The image of that NOA was trying to cultivate at that time was, very family friendly and all of this kind of thing. And so I tried to be fairly careful with the line that that you didn't want to cross over too much, but I didn't want to make the game just be horribly vanilla and boring, and have, for example, the guy behind the door, have him say something like, "Don't come in, I'm busy," or something, that would have been plain and just blah, right? So I got to kind of look at the original Japanese and know that it was, edgy or whatever, and figure out how much do I have to dial it back before I'm happy with what it is, so that there's still a bit of an edge, but not so much that somebody at Nintendo would think, "Oh, this is bad, we got to change this all." And, I obviously didn't want somebody else to come in and rewrite everything I did.
Sure. So, being presented with this script, what did you think? Did you think, "Oh, we've got a hit on our hands for sure, this turn-based role-playing game about children with psychic powers exploring the world and fighting piles of vomit and their stuff as it unfolded"? I can only imagine how that felt for you to be like, this is this huge job you're on, and the project itself was that strange and that unprecedented.
Yeah, well, it's pretty funny. This was so early in even just role-playing games on the Super NES. There'd been a few that had come out, of course, but it was early enough that I didn't really think of it as being, some groundbreaking or interesting kind of a thing. It didn't really occur to me that what I was working on was going to be unusual and different than a lot of other things. I think that I'd sort of assumed that a lot of the stuff we were doing was either going to get picked up by other games and that they would do some of the same stuff, which sadly didn't always happen, because I think some of the really inventive things that they did, would have been great in other games. But and so at the time, I don't think I actually really thought about that stuff at all. I didn't really think about what it could be in terms of the overall game industry or what it might be. Well, let me let me say, there was almost no way I would have thought this would still be going, that I'd be talking about it literally almost 20 years later. I mean, it's dumbfounding that it's had the legs that it has. I mean, and I'm really thankful it has, and that people have responded well, and people have played it, like you said, even all this time later, still enjoy it, still find it interesting and funny and all of that good stuff. But at the time I had zero idea that would have happened. So
wow, yeah, I can only imagine, because as a player, I think it came out when I was 95, so I was 18 or so, and I was really ready for a game that took place in the real world and dealt with real things. The whole fantasy trope felt like it was more or less gone as far as it could go on the technology at that point. So I was blown away by the game, and the fact that, like you said, you would push the edge to a point, but then almost respect the player to be able to figure it out. You didn't have to come right out and be abrasive or rebellious with like truly edgy language, but the level of suggestion there, like, let me know that you knew I was playing it and that I would get it, and like respected my intelligence on that way. That
well,
I think that's one of the many reasons why. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you made it. It's something I still play to this day. Yeah.
Well, it is the kind of thing that I also, and people have asked me about this stuff before too, but I tried to stay away from a lot of phrases and things like that would date it, things that were catchphrases from 1995, because I didn't really want to do something, and I'm not sure, not thinking about the game in the long-term video game realm, I suppose I could have easily sat down and said, well, let's throw in the stuff that's funny for us right now. But I didn't really want to do that. And I've told other people, I mean, I drew a lot of sort of the weird language and sort of the funny aspects of it from things that were in my past that had been many years before. Some of the stuff I've told people comes from, like Looney Tunes kind of stuff. Some of it comes from, and this really is another old thing that a lot of people will have no idea. There was a British comedian named Benny Hill that was just this goofy, sort of a funny, odd guy that they would show his TV shows on PBS when I was growing up, and I thought he was funny, and so some of the stuff comes from him, and lots of older inspirations for some of the jokes and some of the humor and stuff, and so those things weren't tied to 95 much at all, and I think that's been good, because it meant that the bits that had floated up, whether it's Looney Tunes we're talking about or whatever, the things that people I think have found funny over the years with that have played on, and those good things remain good. They sort of become timeless, I guess.
Sure.
And so that it didn't feel, when I was writing it, I didn't want to just pull the stuff from that day, like I said. So thankfully that worked out. And I'm glad you thought it was funny.
Oh yeah. And not just, there's a line between comedy and charm, and I think the two often get mistaken. Like Robin Williams, for instance, sometimes he's very funny, sometimes he's just really, really likable, and it makes you smile and makes you want to laugh. But either way, it's because you're relating. Like you're relating to him either because he's so charming, and therefore you feel connected to him, or his comedy makes you feel connected. Earthbound makes people feel connected right on that line as well. Sometimes it's just so sweet and sincere, and other times it's so surprising and speaking about truths you don't expect to see in video games, especially at the time. All the stuff about religious cults and capitalism, and I'm still. What kind of direction were you given? Were you told, like, make this like Ren and Stimpy and The Simpsons and other stuff that was heading at a similar edge in terms of where cartoons were headed? They were pushing boundaries in terms of what kind of material they were going to talk about at the time. That's what when Earthbound came out, I remember thinking, like, maybe they're going for like a Simpsons, Ren and Stimpy sort of thing with this, especially with the ad campaign. So was that part of the direction you were given, or was that completely unrelated?
I don't think I was ever really told make it like that. I do remember watching Ren and Stimpy at about that time, and thinking it was pretty funny and stuff. And a lot of those very big, charming themes, like you mentioned. Whether it's the happy cultists, or the big story arc elements of friendship and all of the charming bits in the game. A lot of that stuff really is Itoi's writing. It's his inspiration, and it's his it's the things that he cared about and he wanted to put into the story. And that bit of it, I sort of feel like I was just kind of along for the ride, which, is a great thing to have been a part of. But his ideas were the things that did all that, and Earthbound is really, the embodiment of him, and I think his philosophy and the things he cares about and the things that he loved, growing up, and his image of America, for example, and his image of, what it means to be a team and work, together, and his views on religion and all of this kind of stuff is all tied up into this great game, and so much of this really is, his thing, and I feel like I just was so fortunate that when I did the work, I didn't lose a lot of that stuff. Because I think I could have easily, like I said, I could have easily dumbed it down. I could have easily made it, something that I think lost some of that, and I think sometimes that does happen with games from Japan. I think we do tend to lose some of the charm and some of the, interesting aspects and stuff. And so I was fortunate that it worked out as well as it did. But yeah, in terms of direction, the only thing I vaguely remember is, they had done a demo. They had done a demo to get the game greenlit, and so that work had been done and translated by Dan Osen, who actually still works at Nintendo today. And so he had done a few things, and he's the one that actually did come up with some of the, a few of the iconic things, like the Fuzzy Pickles line. That wasn't me. I know I didn't do that one. And looking at the way he had sort of done this demo and the translation was really the thing that sort of told me, okay, that's the tone I want to make sure I follow. And, they had done a small, 10-minute section of the game or whatever for the green light, I think. And, but it was the thing I remember wanting to follow as much as possible. He was also the one that did the joke early on in the game, and on it, or won it, depending on how you want to pronounce it. There's a door you knock on, and the person says, can you tell me the name of this Beatles song, XXXTERDAY, and you say yes or no or whatever. And that was the joke that he had put in, and I remember thinking, okay, so this is great. So I get to be pretty creative, because the original Japanese from that joke, if I remember right, was something totally different than that. But there was a joke there. And so anyway, and that sort of set the tone, so that was what I kind of worked off of, and just thought, when I need to make a change to something that feels right for America, don't shy away from it, and go ahead and put in what you think is sort of goofy or funny, and they did say, quirkiness is the big order of the day. Make sure that it's something that people will be entertained by, while also giving you this long, nice, big storyline that deals with big ideas and big, life lessons almost, and that kind of thing, and charming messages and all that. So that was the tone I took.
Gotcha. Like you were saying, it was so different than other games at the time, and stands to this day as one of the ones that's most critically acclaimed in terms of translation. I think Final Fantasy IV was out by that time. Maybe Final Fantasy VI was, and those are great games too. But it's a world of difference between the translation of Earthbound and the translation on those games, just in terms of creativity and inspiration and sense of kind of a soul to it. Did you play other Japanese RPGs to see how they were translated, and did you think you want to set the bar higher than that, or were you kind of not aware of what the basic standard was back then? Maybe for the best. I mean, maybe you would have aimed low if you knew about like Lufia and stuff like that.
Well, so I definitely played a lot of those games. I actually, I played Final Fantasy when it first came out. In fact, it was one of those that I used to take phone calls on. I would answer questions that people called in about Final Fantasy. And then played Final Fantasy II, which was, 4, I guess, in Japan. And so I had seen all of the translation work there, and had, read all of the the work that Ted Woolsey had done and stuff like that. And I thought it was fine. I knew that it's because it's that sort of faux medieval sort of style of writing and all this kind of thing, it ends up feeling a bit, I don't know, to me all of that stuff ends up feeling a bit hacked at some point anyway, just because doing the these and the thous and all that kind of stuff is fine, but it becomes sort of a caricature of itself at some point to me. And so kind of like you, I had sort of hit this point where I knew it was going to be nice to write in a normal everyday English style that I could throw in colloquialisms and not get too worried about trying to keep some made up medieval style or something. So I was really happy that I got to just kind of go crazy with the style of today. And I mean, like I said, they didn't give me a ton of direction, but I knew that I knew kind of what I wanted. I mean, I had kind of started into it, seen what they had done, and kind of thought, okay, I'm gonna push the line, like I said, to the the point where I feel like it's not gonna be offensive to people. And I don't think I put anything in the game that was really offensive, as far as I remember. But I also knew that I didn't want to like just do it for shock value. I wasn't out to do that. Nintendo wouldn't have wanted that either. So, but it was it was a really fun, interesting time to sort of work on an RPG that was so different than anything else out there, like you said.
Absolutely. I think the only thing that was anything like it, I think Monkey Island had come out by that time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever played any of those games, but those were Earthbound and Monkey Island in terms of writing were the only games at the time that I felt like were written by people who knew me and wanted to speak to me in a language that I knew.
Yeah.
Were those influences at all, the LucasArts games?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I had played Maniac Mansion, and thought that it was a ton of fun. And I don't remember if Day of the Tentacle had come out by then or not.
I don't think so. Maybe.
And I can't remember if that was 94 or 95, but it was maybe right around there. But like you said, and then Monkey Island, I did play a bit of Monkey Island, and yeah, I mean, I liked the style that they used. I've been a big Tim Schafer fan for a long time, and I thought that LucasArts did just some fantastic work with the adventure games, and I'm really glad that they're back now and doing that kind of stuff. But it took a lot of years for people to kind of come full circle and realize that stuff was as good as it was. And yeah, I mean, to some degree, I think I did use some of that as kind of an inspiration for the stuff I was doing, yeah.
Oh, cool. And then the marketing started, and then the game came out. Tell me how that whole experience went.
Well, the one thing that's interesting about working in the game business is, there's the different departments in the company, and the marketing department has its own, and really, I mean, I didn't have much to do with the marketing to some degree. They would come and ask me questions about things in the game. I worked with the guys making the strategy guide, for example, and would look through it and make sure that everything looked like it was correct and proper. And so I did that kind of fact checking and kind of things on the strategy guide, but that was like Nintendo Power guys that really did that whole thing and wrote it all and stuff, and it was a fantastic job. I mean, I thought it was a great thing they did. But in terms of marketing and stuff, they were different groups, and so for me, the whole focus was on completing the game and getting it through test and making sure that it was approved and ready to be manufactured and all that kind of thing. And so I'll be honest, for me, on the day that it gets approved by lot check, it's called, which every game that gets submitted to Nintendo goes through a lot check procedure, it's called, where they do check content and things like that in the game, but I also just check it against hardware, and they do all of the checks for the standard things that you have to follow. How do you deal with saved games? How do you deal with controllers getting pulled out? How do you deal with all of this sort of basic stuff? And in the course of getting through tests, and then when you get to the day where it's approved, honestly, at that point you're so exhausted and you're so happy to be done. You kind of just look at it and say, whatever happens, it's beyond my control at this point. Especially in those days where you had no ability to update anything, no ability to patch. What you did and threw out into the wild was what you got. And so for me, I was kind of happy to just get done with it.
Well, that takes me to something I meant to ask earlier, but I didn't. Do you think the time pressure you're on inspired some of the wildness to it? Because I think I've described the game like this before. It almost feels like, and I mean this in the best possible way, like a friend is handwriting a note to you real quick that's trying to make you laugh, but they don't have much time, so they're not going to like edit themselves or like some of the NPC dialogue in particular. You're in a club and you talk to a guy, and he'll just be like, "Oh, I'm in love with a woman over there. Don't tell anyone." And you're like, "Why did that just happen?" And that could be like its own story in itself, but it's just this kind of inspired burst of feeling will come across in the most random of places. Was that because you just had to like hustle and get it done by, 3 months? And the script for that game, I can only imagine, was.
It was big. And yes, I think that some of this stuff did absolutely come through because of the lack of time. I think that I was hurrying so quickly. There were days that I know I was exhausted, and there's times when I can look at a line in the game and kind of think, okay, I must have been really tired to have done that or said that or something, So I think that was a part of it. I think there are things in the game that I wrote really quick. And I told myself I want to go back and change it, and I didn't get the chance, and it still bugs me to this day because there are times when I can look at it and I can remember that I knew I wanted to change it, but it just didn't happen. And so the way the game is, I'm going to be totally honest with you. When I play the beginning of the game in particular, there are so many parts in that I just dislike because of what I wrote, and
Really?
I
can't even imagine.
And I know it could have been better. Oh, there are things in it that just the flow is like not right for me and stuff. But it was a time thing, and I'm just happy that people don't have the same feeling, and it's probably a part of being hypercritical of your own work and things like that, and being sort of a perfectionist at heart in some ways about this. But yeah, it's hard for me to actually look at the beginning of the game and not just feel slightly embarrassed about some of the stuff.
Really?
Like Buzzbuzz's speech, the Buzzbuzz speech when he's dying. There's so many things in there I would have loved to have changed. It just doesn't flow the way I really wanted it to. And given more time, I think I could have done it better. But thankfully, like I said, I think I get lucky because people give me a pass on some of this because of the quirky nature of the whole game.
Oh boy, that's I don't even know. It's kind of like if George Lucas was like, that whole Luca and the other part. I don't know. I don't know if that turned out quite as well. Like, what are you talking about? Buzzbuzz's dialogue is like the best part of the game. Wow, well, and I'm sure you had other people yell at you in similar way with that.
People have told me why do you think that? How can you think that? And it's mostly just because, well, like I said, I think I've got this idea about the way I wanted it to kind of flow, and especially when it's a part like that where it's this long speech, and it's line after line after line, and like I said, I in my head I sort of had a way I wanted it to go, and literally there are parts in the game where there's blocks of text that I didn't know what was going to come next necessarily, and so I would write it a certain way, and then when the next block of text would come in, that in the way the text file was organized, it was a little choppy, and there were things that got put together and they were in different places, and I didn't know that they were going to come together in the way they did in the game, and then it just sounded wrong to me because I didn't write it to fit with the next line. It's that kind of stuff that just drives me crazy.
Yeah,
but anyway,
only
I would know. It's only stuff I would know.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I'd love for you to get a second crack at it one of these days. Maybe not.
I would love to. I would love to actually rewrite Earthbound in some ways.
Huh. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, it probably would be, and it would be fun to, fix some of the bad puns and stuff like that.
But you know what would happen? It would be George Lucas all over again when he made Darth Vader's lightsaber slightly pinker when he released the DVD version, and was completely freaked out. You can't. I don't think you can ever go back to Earthbound and not upset people. Though you could do Mother 3. That would be pretty excellent if Nintendo bring that over and bring you back on.
Well, that would be cool in some ways. I mean, I know that one of the guys that has been a part of the Starman.net community for a long time, a guy named Mado, has done a translation of it, and I'm actually trying to play through it now. He actually gave me a version of it that I can play, which is kind of cool. But I mean, as much as I would enjoy doing it, I would hate to kind of step on somebody else's work that they had done and things like that. Especially, he told me, which is really a cool thing, he told me that when he did his translation for Mother 3, the fan translation, he really tried to kind of keep that same tone that I had used in Earthbound, which is a very cool thing. So I was very flattered that he told me that.
Yeah, they did an excellent job. I think that translation patch came out a while ago. I want to say 3 years ago. I bought the game, and the Japanese version comes with all these extras, which is really nice. So I didn't feel too bad about adding the patch to it and playing through it. They did a wonderful job, but if it were to come out officially from Nintendo, my opinion is that Nintendo and Mado team up for the ultimate PR team on that, because you've become kind of the face of Earthbound to a lot of people. You've done some excellent interviews, and the game has this whole new presence now. People see it as a kind of a nostalgia thing, but also all new players are picking it up as this kind of unique picture of where games were headed at the time, and also a game that has so many universal, timeless aspects to it. So it's I think it's selling more now than it ever has. I gathered anyway.
I think it actually, the version on Wii U now, I believe has outsold what the original cart did. Yeah, and that's great. I mean, I'm flattered again that people like it well enough and talk about it enough to get people to try it again after all these years. The price of the carts was sort of ridiculous at some point. I mean, I'm glad I've still got mine, I guess. But it's the kind of thing that I think for Nintendo, it would be great if they decided to take the next step and do a Mother 3. The odds of them bringing me in to do it are probably next to nothing. But yeah, I mean, that's having worked there. I mean, I kind of know how they are, and I would be surprised if they did that. It's just kind of the way it is with them. They've got a huge team. They've got a group of people there that do really good localization work now, and I suspect they would just want them to do it because that's the group they're comfortable with and stuff. And using outside groups, I think, is fairly uncommon for them. So but yeah, I mean, I would love because Mado's deal is he's a translator as well as the localizer, and for me, like I said, I didn't really do what I consider the translation work. I did the localizing work. Took this big script of raw English and boiled it down to what it is now, whereas he can look at the Japanese and he can sort of pick out the subtleties. I do know that with Itoi's writing style has been called to me a number of different things, but one of them is that you're trying to translate the untranslatable, because his style in Japanese is very singular. And when I was working on it, I remember when Miura-san came and talked to me about things in the game, the one thing he told me, he said, is, there are things in here, subtleties and weird things that even in Japanese people don't get and they don't pick up. And, I'm sure that there are things that I missed in the translation because of that. And I think with Miura-san explaining to me a lot of the stuff, it helped hugely. And I think that was a big part of the success of the translation. But, for Mado, I'm sure it would be a really interesting thing with Mother 3 because his perspective is going to be different as well. So it would be great. I would love to do that. But, an official thing from Nintendo, I guess we'll just have to wait and see if anything like that would ever come out.
They are changing. You know the company obviously much better than I do, as you worked there. But from what I've gathered, they're trying to branch out and reach out to people that can help them improve their image in particular. And for years, Earthbound was this kind of Achilles heel in terms of their PR, because they'd talk about anything, and then there'd be at least 1,000 people saying, "Oh yeah, how come you haven't brought Earthbound out? How come you haven't brought it out? You know, I don't even care what you're talking about. Where's Earthbound?" Now that they finally brought it out, it's made them all this money, and hopefully they're seeing that a big part of that is because of the fan community, and to reach out to the fans who helped make the game so marketable and bring them on board would be a really interesting thing to see. Yeah.
Yeah. I absolutely agree.
Won't happen.
Well, the fan community is the thing that I am always hugely thankful for, hugely impressed by, and in some ways never-endingly surprised by their devotion and just loyalty to the game and to all the things that kind of go around it. Going to a convention and seeing people dressed up as the characters, seeing artwork and stuff like that people do is, if this was 19 years ago, I would feel like, okay, some of that's going to happen, but 19 years later, the fan community is literally the best fan community I think there is in games.
Yeah, I could see why. And the way Fangamer has risen up from Starman.net and become a company that's, I hope, is profitable. I've never asked them, but I assume they are, based all on that community and that feeling of, like, we directly care about, you are one of us, we care about you, and this game cared about us and made us feel intimately connected to it in a way that no other game did, is why I think it continues to grow in size instead of shrink like so many fan communities do. 19 years later, bigger than ever. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is. Fangamer, they're great guys, and I am hugely appreciative, like I said, for all of the things they did to keep it going, and all the stuff they've done over the years. And I think the business is doing well, and it makes me really happy to know that they were able to take something that they cared about so deeply and turn it into essentially a career.
Yeah, absolutely. Just living the dream, all right. Were you, when we met at PAX briefly, I still have a little card that has an Earthbound picture on it. The implication of an Earthbound thing might happen. Is that a thing that might happen?
Well, unfortunately, it probably can't happen, essentially, at least the way I had originally intended. I thought that I would just put down all my thoughts about the stuff that went on, things that happened, and also then just kind of go through, and I wanted to do kind of a playthrough of the game almost and talk about special lines that I remembered that there was something interesting about. So it ended up being a kind of thing where I was asked not to do it.
Oh, come on. That's terrible. Yeah, but you being you're not going to say no.
Well, yeah, so I'm unfortunately probably not going to write that book, as much as I really would have loved to.
Mm-hmm.
I think I underestimated or something the legal aspects of it, if you will, almost. Although I don't think there's really anything legal there, because the thing I've tried to tell people is I'm not actually doing this to rag on anybody or say bad things about anything. It's actually absolutely the opposite of that. It's to support the fan community. It's to build up the game and hopefully result in more sales and all this kind of thing, and increase interest and increase people's love of the game. Sure. But it didn't happen that way, and they kind of I got asked not to write it, so I'm not going to write it.
You feel comfortable telling who told you not to write it?
Nintendo.
Oh, you guys! PR! Don't you know that telling the guy who helped make Earthbound as great as it is that he can't talk about the things he did when he made... Oh...
Well, I was hoping
I'm set for you, but...
Well, and I was really hoping, and like I said, I mean, I guess I underestimated the idea that I thought, okay, it's been literally almost 20 years. The things we did were so rudimentary and so different than what they do today that it's got literally nothing to do with localizing work now. We did things that were so brute force. We wrote on a piece of paper the translation and then put it into a little handheld computer that took the text file that went back to Japan that they would integrate into it was so basic and so just so different than the way you do work now. There's so many tools. Things are done in a way that is so sophisticated with localization because everybody wants to ship their titles worldwide on the same day now. So you have to have all these things set up, have translators and teams of translators working on games, and everything has to be really just bang, bang, bang to make it work. And, we weren't a simultaneous release, of course. We came out months after Japan. So things were so different, and so I guess I had really thought, nobody really cares that much. And this is, I guess, another case of me sort of underestimating the reaction to Earthbound. For so many years, I just never really could quite square in my own mind that what I had done had that kind of a following or the reaction that people had, and I guess that was another case of me thinking, oh, why would anybody care about me talking about stuff I did on Earthbound? But they did, so,
Wow. Is it a privacy thing, you think? Or are they afraid that people are going to steal their secrets or that they're going to somehow look bad? Or, it's 20 years ago. I'm trying to wrap my head around this, thinking that.
I suspect it may be a little bit of all of that. I think it's sadly not a simple answer. I think it's got little bits of every group, at Nintendo that somebody will say, well, what if this was going on, or what if he said this, And the thing that sort of got me is I even told him, I said, look, I'll give you my manuscript. You can tell me to take out anything you want. I don't care. No, it wasn't enough, which is too bad. But, look, I'm not here to badmouth Nintendo because they gave me this opportunity, and they're the ones that, gave me the chance to work on a game like Earthbound, and they do great things, and, I'm just happy, again, like I said, that, all these years later, people are still interested. I don't attribute that to Nintendo, just so to be clear. I attribute the interest in all of that to the fan community. I attribute it to guys like you that loved the game and played it and thought it was, a great game that was underappreciated. But Nintendo, at the end of the day, I can't badmouth them, like I said, because I would have never been here without them.
Yeah. It's so hard when you talk about a company because there are people there that I'm sure would be thrilled about the book and would want you to make it, and then there must be other people who I find, and I want to move on to talking about this as an industry thing in general. I find that from where I stand in the industry, I see a lot of people who don't really understand the fans and the appeal of what they're making. They don't play a lot of video games themselves and never did, and that instills them with kind of a fear, because it's almost like doing this blind, and all they can go by is the numbers, and that tends to make them much more controlling and more afraid of if anything could come back to bite them in any way, then they just shut it down and don't look at all the advantages that can come from it because they're kind of driven by a fear of lack of control and lack of understanding. It's the only thing I can, because if you understand the Earthbound fan community at all and the people who love this game and love to talk about it, having a new book would just give them an excuse to talk about it. They'd spread the book around. They'd show people. Other people would play it. They'd get a hold of the passion. I'm sure they would get nothing but more sales from Earthbound and of the Wii U in general if your book came out. Someone's too afraid to take that risk. Is that something you see in the industry widespread? Because you've, beyond Nintendo, we talked a little bit before the show, you've worked at Vivendi, you've worked with EA, you've worked at THQ, you worked on Halo 4, I think you said? It's an intense amount of work you've done.
I've done a lot of things in the industry for a long time and worked at a good number of companies, sadly, over the years in some ways. But yeah, I do think that there's a lot of big companies, especially that tell themselves they sort of understand what the fan communities around their games are and what they do and what they should do. But I think there's a fundamental bit for some portion of the guys in these companies. They're not actually fans in a way. They like the fact they work in the game industry. They like the sort of cool aspect of it and things like that. But I can't help and maybe they even play some games. But I don't think they really quite grasp what it means for fans that are. It's way beyond just being a job and being something that you enjoy on the weekends or sometimes in the evenings or whatever, or when you're waiting for a bus or whatever you're doing. I don't think they really get what fans feel for some of these games and the properties and stuff. And I think that that's the part that gets lost so often. And I mean, I don't play games nearly as much as I would like and nearly as much as I used to. But thankfully there are things that I'll hit and that will strike a chord with me, and I'll play the game to the end, and look for a sequel and play that and things like that. And like I said, I wish there were more of them. I wish I had time for more of them. But people become really passionate about this stuff in a way that I sometimes think that the people that don't care about this stuff really as a part of their everyday life never really grasp. And so some of those guys in marketing groups, some of the guys, whether they're executives or whatever, can't understand why people would get married, with Earthbound characters on their dress and stuff that people have told me. I don't think they have any clue as to what it takes to be a true fan. I mean, they're the people that would make fun of Trekkies, and they're the people that aren't that. I mean, I sort of hate to say it, but I mean they're not true geeky guys, and at heart they're girls. I mean, the people that are the fans really get it, and it's guys like you that do this kind of stuff. Talk about it. This is what you do for enjoyment, I'm sure, as well as what your work is. This is what makes you happy. And I think there's a lot of people in the game business that don't get that. Sadly, I think their vision of games and the game industry has either been beat down because of the work, and so then they're not having fun anymore, and it comes through in the things they do. And consequently, they don't understand people that do still enjoy games, and it is their life, and they do have fun doing this stuff. But yeah, it's a sad thing when that happens. But there's no way around it to some degree, and that's why today I'm so happy that there's a indie industry, and that game developers that are small and don't have to answer to anybody and can do what they need to make their game fun or interesting or known or whatever. Don't have to follow all those rules. So, thankfully that's happening today. But I do think that it's a tough business, I gotta say.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about it. It's not as though these people are dismissive or mean-spirited, but they've got the stockholders to fear, and they've got their jobs that could get. It's a cutthroat industry, from what I've come to understand. So going indie. That's not easy either, though. That's what you're doing now, if I remember correctly. You have carried away games, and then also a company that does more for hire work. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I actually have me and the two guys that I met when I worked at the THQ office that got shut down. We decided to start our own company, and we ended up starting two because, like I said, one of them is a contract business, and that's where we went and we worked on Halo 4, for example, and we did that for a good amount of time and helped them with completing Halo 4, because we've worked on lots of games, we've done a lot of projects, and so we were able to help them out with that work. And that's the way we've stayed sort of truly independent. We don't owe anybody any money. We don't have VC, anybody that owns a part of our company that we have to answer to. We purely get to do whatever we want. And that was purely by design for us. It's created a whole slew of issues, as well, and circumstances that we have to work through. And it is very a roller coaster ride that for some people, I think they wouldn't really enjoy it, but at the same time, we are truly independent, and but we're also fortunate to have had that history and that work that we can go to somebody like Microsoft and say, "Have you got anything you need, help on?" and they'll scan around and say, yeah, can you spare a programmer for a few months or year or whatever. And that's the way we actually keep going. And then, we work on things on the side outside of that work we're doing. Or, if one guy is working at Microsoft, then the two of us are working on our own stuff. And, the hope that we put out something that does well enough to not have to be contracting anymore. That's the ultimate goal for us.
Sure.
But yeah, the business is a tough business. It's the kind of thing where, today there's so many more opportunities for small groups than there used to be, which is fantastic. But there's a lot of us trying to make games. So, and there's only so many people and so many eyeballs and so much time in a day. You got to hope that what you do stands out, and that's a tough thing. So.
Sure, absolutely. Do you have if you had limited money, if somebody was just like, here's the billions, make a game, I don't care if it sells, just do whatever you want. Do you have an idea of what you would want to do?
Well, if I had unlimited funds, I mean, to be honest with you, I would love to, I literally would love to go over and talk to Itoy about making a true, like, Mother sequel, that was done, an RPG, a Japanese/American RPG that really tapped into that. That's sort of interesting. One of the things I loved about Earthbound was that sort of interesting view of America from the outside, and touch that again. Because I haven't really gotten to play Mother 3 yet. I mean, I know it's a darker game. I know it deals with, I think, a lot more of the sort of universal difficult things that everybody deals with in terms of death and things like that. I would love to go back and say, well, can we do something that is maybe a little less dark, but at the same time, it deals with big truths, but is, I loved the quirky sense of humor in Earthbound. I loved the funny aspects. I loved the, like you said, just the oddities of walking up to people and having them say just funny stuff. And I loved going through and, when we made all the characters, when we got to name the characters, some of the funny things we did. There was a group of 3 of us that sat down and went through all the game items and game characters and names, and we did all of the enemy names over the course of a day or two, I think, with all the item names, and wow. we had to bust it out really quick too. But it was me and Dan Osen again. He was a part of sitting down and doing that, and then also Scott Pelland, who was the editor on Nintendo Power, who was working on the strategy guide, and the 3 of us sat down in a room with, again, Mutis on to try to explain to us to make sure we knew what the things were that we were doing, and we just busted out all these names. So I'd love to go back. I'd love to go back and redo something that just, tried to recapture some of the fun, lighthearted, interesting fun bits. Because there's still, I mean, all these years later, it just kind of kills me. There's not enough. Well, I mean, there are games that certainly integrate humor into them, but I don't know that they do it in a way that is the same as Earthbound. Maybe you can talk about that, because I'm curious. You've got a better view of all the games in the industry these days, and do you think there's stuff out there that you would sort of say has that Earthbound quality?
There is some things that approach it. So many of them are games made by like 3 guys that you'll never see. There's a game called Mega Man Sprite Game that's just basically Earthbound with Mega Man, except he's fat and he's looking for balls, looking for basketballs or something. Like, it's just a completely ridiculous fan game, which captures the Earthbound spirit all the time, but there's very, very rare that there's a game by a major publisher that's willing to take that kind of risk on comedy, because comedy in games, they're
tough.
Still figuring it out. Yeah, so much of it, I think, has to do with the timing and whether the player feels like they created the joke or are being laughed at, potentially. And Earthbound to me is so often about video games, whether it meant to be or not. Like, it played with the idea that you have to have all this junk NPC dialogue that we're all getting kind of tired of by the time it happened, and just uses it to, it almost like acknowledges, like, this is completely ridiculous, and what I'm going to say isn't important at all, but I'm going to try to put a smile on your face with it. But there's so much more to it beyond that. I could talk about it for so long. The fact that is coupled with all these very, very serious ideas feels like a parody of video games that take themselves too seriously, but at the same time, it's very, very effective at dealing with those ideas too, which then keeps you off balance, and that's another big is keeping you off balance. I can go on and on, but it's something that is very unique. I'd say Tim Schafer's games and Earthbound are some of the few games that have really pulled off comedy in games at all. So I'd love to see you take another crack at it. Before I forget, though, because we have some time left, but we don't have as much as I thought we would. We haven't really talked about the rest of your career at all, but they would kill me if I didn't ask you if you named the Dragonite item. Do you remember that item? Turns you into a dragon?
Well, so I'm sure that would have been in the same group, like the three of us sitting and running through every object. And I don't think I named that one myself off the top of my head. I don't remember that one, but I'm sure that we did it in that room, and that we were kind of running through everything. And yeah, the thing that turns you into dragon being called Dragonite seems a pretty straightforward, easy one for us. How come? I'm kind of curious why Dragonite. Why are you interested in that one?
Because Dragonite was then one of the most popular Pokemon in Pokemon.
Oh.
And it now has a life of its own. Inadvertently, you guys kind of set forth. Because another thing that's very interesting to me is how much every Nintendo game I saw come after Earthbound tried to get a little bit of that Earthbound flavor into it in terms of levity, in terms of like self-acknowledging the silliness and giving you a lot of personality, like more bang for your buck from personality in terms of talking to NPCs. I definitely got that from Pokemon. I got that from Animal Crossing. I got that from some aspects of the 3D Zelda games, because Zelda games didn't have like towns where you talk to people with all this personality and lightness until after Earthbound. It seemed to kind of, even though the sales weren't there at the time and people might not have thought it was very influential, it always felt to me like internally it might have been influential, because it seemed to kind of be at the start of a turning point for the way Nintendo dealt with story in general in their games.
Well, and I think a part of that comes from the fact that in Japan it was pretty influential. I think it was very popular, and it actually did, have good sales there. And so consequently, a lot of these titles that, like you just mentioned, whether it's Zelda or Pokemon or whatever, those are all games that did well in Japan. And I think that in Japan, Itoi's stuff was absolutely influential. Whether or not the Dragonite name was pulled over to Pokemon because of Earthbound, I'd love to hope so. But the guys that did Earthbound was a company called Ape, and I've heard, and I don't even know this for 100% certainty because I haven't followed it quite as close as some people I know. But I think that the guys at Ape kind of rolled into the group that did, to some degree, the Pokemon game. So some of that may have very well carried over to Pokemon because they were the guys that had worked on Earthbound as well. So that doesn't surprise me too much that there's that connection. But like I said, Itoi-san is hugely revered in Japan in a lot of ways for the things he's done over the years. He's sort of this Renaissance man kind of character. So to have it spread across other Japanese titles, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all that his influence can be felt on a lot of those games, yeah.
Gotcha. But they must have, I don't know, I'd like to think that they saw that Earthbound was something that resonated with people deeply too. I hope so, because they must have thought the American market as well and what works here, and if Earthbound worked here, at least with the people who understood it and gave it a chance, because like you were saying before, part of the reason it didn't sell so well, I'm sure, is just that it was an $80 game that was all new IP that was coming out sort of towards the tail end of the SNES era. Yeah, there's a whole other discussion there, but we got to talk about you before I forget. Oh, but one other thing. What do you think the Holmes hat looks like? Do you remember the item, the Holmes hat? I think you get it at not at Summers, at Winters, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was a Sherlock Holmes based thing. So that's the Holmes. That's where the Holmes came from. It was because I'm pretty sure it's a cap that is the prototypical sort of Sherlock Holmes thing. So
I
that's
thought
why
it
it's
was
called
just my
Holmes.
hat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would have been nice. It would have been nice if we would have known that years earlier. Yes, and we could have said there's this awesome time travel thing going on. But yeah, so the Holmes hat was almost certainly a Sherlock Holmes reference.
Okay, I'll take that. I
See,
almost didn't want to ask.
Well, and that's the kind of stuff that I would have loved to have just clarified for people in the book, right? I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing I would have just said. Here's all the items. Here's the things that I can tell you why it's named. It's that everybody obviously knows that the Casey bat is called the Casey bat because it whiffs a lot, and it's great that we had a poem that actually fit really well into that. And so when it came time to name that object, which in Japanese was something totally different, I don't even remember. Casey bat was the perfect name for it, and so we named it the Casey bat. And but that kind of thing is the stuff I would have loved to have let people know.
I wonder if they'll change their mind if the fans get loud. Probably not. Rats, Nintendo.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not even really. Sadly, I'm not even sort of considering it anymore at this point. If they came to me, certainly. But I don't think about it too much. Life is too short for me to get too bothered by that stuff.
Sure, you've got other fish to fry, I'm sure. So after Nintendo, maybe we can trace back your whole career, because it is interesting the amount of jumps you made from just about almost so many of the big Western companies. EA was involved. Did you say Activision as well?
Not Activision. Well, no. So the companies I went to EA right after Nintendo. So I worked on sports games for a couple of years. Then I went and worked at an independent developer in Florida named Nspace, and worked on a sequel to the Die Hard trilogy, which had been out on PlayStation really early on. I was there for a couple of years. My wife said we just can't live on the East Coast anymore because our whole family was on the West Coast, and we had to get back at least to somewhere on the West Coast. Went to Midway in San Diego for about a year. I went back to EA for a short amount of time, and that studio was a .com office, which got shut down, sadly, in the .com blow-up in 2000. That was when I went to Vivendi, and I was in LA for a couple of years. And that was good. I mean, I was an outside producer at that point, working with, titles that were being developed around the world. So I worked on a number of titles there. They transferred me up to the Sierra office in Seattle, I'd really wanted to get back to Seattle for family reasons and stuff. And they were, they were great to transfer me up. Unfortunately, the Sierra office got shut down a few months after that, and it was one of the times the Sierra office has gotten closed, because it's been closed multiple times over the years. And then I went to THQ, and I was there for almost 5 years, I guess, until that was when I met the two guys I have my company with now. And so after that, which that was in 2008 that they shut us down at THQ, and started our company.
What did you work on there?
Oh, so I worked on Evil Dead Regeneration, which was a game that it sounds like more people liked than I even thought of as well. I mean, we had a great time making that game. It was a ton of fun, sort of adding as much humor into that game as well, coming up with what we thought was sort of fun gameplay elements that not many other games did. I mean, you've got the little zombie sidekick with you that you can kick around and stuff like that. And the humor and things like that, we felt like came through pretty well. But that was a fun game to work on as well. But it was the same kind of thing that in the industry, it wasn't a AAA title. It wasn't one of those huge, big budget, big team kind of games. And so I think it came out and fairly quickly got kind of swept under the rug. I was mentioning earlier to someone that it seems like back in those days there were games that when you worked on it, you knew that you were, with the reviewers, you were starting at like a 70, and if you did a good job, they might boost it up to 80 if you did some particularly great things. But a lot of times you'd end up in that 60 to 72 range or something, and that was kind of what you were going to be you were going to be at. Whereas AAA games always seem to start at a 90, and then if it's a poorly done game, will drop from there or go up, But
Sure.
this was one that was, a mid-tier kind of a thing. It was a movie-ish knockoff, and but I think we did a good job with it. We had a lot of fun things. We had dual weapons you could wield. We did a lot of fun stuff, I thought. And the story was quirky and goofy as well. We didn't follow a movie script or anything like that, which I think a lot of the other Evil Dead games tried to do. But I worked on that at THQ, and then after that we did work on a Destroy All Humans game, which unfortunately didn't do well because we were getting shut down while we were working on it. So it got pushed out early, if you will. So it would have been nice to have actually finished that game too, but it was again the same kind of thing. Not a big budget game. A staff of 50 people, even back in 2008, was not that big. I mean, there were teams that were well over 100 at that point. These days, 100 is not even considered a big team. It's hundreds that take part in some of these big AAA games now, and but that was the stuff I worked on at THQ. Those were the last games I worked on at a traditional game company.
And then you ended up working on Halo 4, which got pretty good reviews. That must have been nice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it is sort of the same kind of thing, right? That there's hundreds of people on the team, and that it's got this huge marketing push behind it. The work that went into it was, it was a Herculean effort, even with that big of a team, to get everything in they wanted. And we worked really hard. The one thing I will say that's very nice about doing that kind of contract work is that, for the first time, and me and the guys I work with, we got paid for all of the crunch time we did at the end of the project, which was great. It's like usually when you're on salary, you're just crunching, and for us, we got paid for every hour we were working, which was great. So it was a good thing. We were happy to take all the extra hours, and it made working 80-hour weeks palatable in a lot of ways.
And has it been that way for most of your time in the industry, that you would end up having to do that kind of extra
crunch
work for less pay? Yeah, is that just kind of the culture of the industry as you see it?
It's a sadly a normal part for a lot of game companies. And it's better than I think it used to be, but it comes in waves, right? I mean, there will be a period of normal 40-hour work weeks and things like that, but inevitably in the course of a game project, when you've got 2 or 3 years on a project, some game will get released in the middle of it, and it'll do something that you look at and you think, oh, now we got to integrate something like that into the game, because otherwise we'll be considered behind the curve. Or things that just normally happen in the course of a game development. Someone will leave the company, somebody who's crucial to the game development process, and then they've got to take the time to find somebody to replace them, and that slows things down, and something gets either cut or dropped or whatever. And so in the course of trying to keep the game going, inevitably you end up with a pile of work at some milestone or whatever, whether you want to say it happens at alpha or a beta or the final. You end up with this pile of work that you just need to kind of plow through a lot of hours. And I know that there are projects out there that people say, well, we never crunched and things. And I think that that's good, but my guess is they either didn't have a publisher or they didn't have a strict deadline or something, right? Like the work that we do in my own little company is a totally different kind of a thing, because we don't crunch like that. We actually are able to work long hours when we want or not, but it's sort of just based on purely kind of where we're at with what we feel like doing, not, because we don't have a release date. There isn't a deadline that we're working towards, really. We just sort of feel like we're in that boat of it's done when it's done. Like when we're happy with it, when we feel like we've done the things that we need to and it looks the way we want and it plays the way we want, we'll release it. But we're not sort of setting an arbitrary date and saying it has to be done by February and we're going to put it out whether it's good or bad. But that's what a publisher does. That's the work that most people in the industry have always worked under, because you've got a release schedule, you've got a time when the stockholders are wanting a certain amount of revenue, so you release whether the game is ready or not sometimes. And that's standard.
Yeah, it's hopefully changing though as indie gets bigger and makes more money. Do you ever see a day when there aren't these AAA games that have a built-in 90 just based on their marketing and their polish in terms of how much money was thrown at them, and this other tier of game that, like you were saying, you start at a 70 and then hopefully you can get up, but you might go down if there's any just sort of tiny imperfection where to me, it speaks to a larger part of the video game consumer culture where there's certain games where you're supposed to like them and you feel like there's something wrong with you if you don't. I know I've reviewed many games where people were like, why did you give that a good score? Everyone knows it's bad. I'm like, it's not even out yet. I've played it. I know it's not that bad. They're like, no, I know that it's not good because of whatever genre it was in or what franchise it was in or how shiny the graphics looked, and quite the opposite, that we have people who will get very angry at our reviews if they're a 9 instead of a 10 for, again, a game they haven't played, but they just have it in their mind that games with a certain stamp on them, with a certain level of budget, are automatically half perfect. And then combining that with the whole crunch curve where the publishers are behind just getting it out by a certain date, and all these shelved projects. I've heard that LucasArts, before they closed, had like at least 10 games in production that were like almost done, but they kept having people leave the company or get shuffled around. So there's all these half-done games, all these aspects of the business that seem terrible because of the big publishers. I'm blaming them. Can we get rid of them somehow?
Well, thankfully, I think the business is actually slowly getting rid of some of these publishers. I mean, THQ is one example. And for every, bad example, I mean, I think there are some that are good still. But, I, as an independent developer, am happy that things are, I think, actually kind of changing. But I will say, I saw an example 2 days ago that just, I don't get it. I don't know what to make of the game business sometimes, and consumers and reviewers, and I don't know. After 20 years, I am as flummoxed as anybody. And the game I'm going to tell you about this is, and you tell me your opinion about this. So Steam has their Christmas sale, yeah? Mm-hmm. And 2 days ago, I see Gone Home is on sale. And I see Gone Home on a lot of top 10 lists in year-end lists, right? Did you play Gone Home?
Sure.
Okay. I went in and looked at the reviews on Steam. There are so many people that hated it, seemingly, that I couldn't tell what was going on. Like, is it the fact that it's the hardcore crowd really doesn't like something that's just sort of esoteric and different, or is it? I mean, I don't know what to do with my own. What do I take out of that? Do I think maybe I shouldn't make something really different? Maybe it is about making these big budget cookie cutter games, because that's what I look at when I see some of these big games. I think, okay, it's a sequel to a game that was, a sequel to another game that was a sequel to another game that may have done something interesting, but the interesting bits are kind of lost in a lot of ways for me. But they're getting huge ratings and huge sales. People love them. Mm-hmm. And then I see these other games that I think, okay, well, maybe that would be interesting. Maybe I should play it. But then a ton of people say, "Oh no, it's crap. Why even play it? It's not, there's no shooting in it. You're just looking around. I mean, and it's short. It only lasts 3 hours. And it's like, but it's a $4 game. I mean, that's a cup of coffee for a lot of people at Starbucks. Anyway, how do you feel about that stuff? I mean, Gone Home. I mean, did you like it?
We have 10 minutes left. Oh, gosh darn it. Maybe we can have you on this separate Gone Home episode. Yeah?
Well, yeah, because, I mean, honestly, I told you this before we started. I can talk about this stuff forever. You could let me go for hours if you wanted to. But so Gone Home as an example, is
maybe
it the kind of...
I'm gonna try to have a special up Holmes where you host it, because you've got a great radio voice, by the way.
Oh,
you could just be a DJ
that.
if you want. No, man, it's husky without being like intimidating, but not like
okay.
Velvety in a way that feels like too
smarmy.
Yeah, just right.
Okay,
maybe we can get the Gone Home guys on, and you can talk to them. and girls.
Well, I should play it first before I do that, but yeah.
It's well, there's a vocal minority on the internet who, Gone Home deals with a lot of stuff that people find offensive anyway because it has to do with coming out of the closet, and it also has a lot of 90s nostalgia, which a lot of people feel alienated by. So there's a lot of people who love video games, and don't mean to disrespect them in any way because your love is genuine, but part of what they love is that it's a place where they feel included. They and millions of people are all playing Call of Duty on day one, and they're all excited about the same things, and blah, blah, blah. And then something like Gone Home comes out, and it's like, oh, yeah, well, if you are gay, love the 90s, then this game is for you. And they're like, what? You're supposed to make games catering just to me. You're making a thing for people who are gay who love the 90s? I hate this game. Everyone should hate this. It shouldn't get good ratings. And then when it gets a lot of positive press and game blogs talk about it all the time, they start to get afraid, like maybe the games I like and make me feel included are going to go by the wayside. Maybe they're going to make things for people that are weird. No, normal games about shooting guys in the face only, forever. And then they get in arguments, and then they kind of define themselves by their arguments and stick to them, even though, like, when you try to talk with some of the people who feel that way about Gone Home, not just that they're like, oh, it wasn't for me, but, like, I'm angry that this was made. If you try to actually have a back and forth with them, they're so attached to their argument because they've defined themselves by it that they're unable to budge, and they get in a kind of a sad place where they are never going to move forward or at least sideways. They're stuck right where they are. You play Gone Home for sure, though. I would be interested to hear what you think of it. And we have a bunch of questions that came in, and I want to give them due time and give you time to talk about anything we might have missed. XKevX asks, when you're writing dialogue, do you ever get concerned that the proper tone and inflections won't come across without voice actors? If so, how do you deal with that?
Well, that's a really good question. The voice acting thing that, granted, I didn't have to deal with that with Earthbound. It was purely text, right? It made it nice. I could just try to get things into the text that I wanted to get across. Hence, I got things in the text in Earthbound like little stars around the word snicker and stuff like that, just to try to provide the audio bit that we didn't have. Now, when we work with like voice actors and stuff these days, when I was working on projects where I was on the publisher side and we were paying for everything, I would go to the audio sessions, and you just hope that you get a chance to do a bit of directing, but it's tough. It is, because the actors are, again, it's the same kind of thing. You don't know if they even sort of get what you're trying to do with the story. You don't know if they're if they've read through it, and even then, sometimes it's really hard because they'll have their lines in the script and they won't see what other people's lines are, and so it is actually really hard to make the story in a game flow, especially with the voice acting, because everybody's reading their lines sometimes without the context of what's before or after at times. It depends on how good the director is. It depends on how good, as a localization producer and stuff like that, this is a part of it too, how much you can get the people into, the whole feeling of what the story is like, and get the right voice acting out of it. I mean, I'll tell you, there have been a lot of projects I've worked on where the person they hire first to do some voice part has to get replaced because in the end it just doesn't work right. And if they really have the time and the energy and the budget and things like that, they'll swap out the people. I think sometimes if you play a game and you sort of think, well, that acting job wasn't as good as it could have been, probably was because they didn't have the budget or the time or something. Which is, again, making video games is really hard at times because you don't even think about this stuff. But, the story has to get written, and then it can't be, like, redone without repercussions across all kinds of parts of the game. But that story, if it's done early enough, you hope that it fits the gameplay great and that the gameplay doesn't change. And if it's done early enough, you have a chance to go into the studio, do this recording, and then maybe redo it if you need to. You do pickup sessions and things like that, they're called. And the more pickup sessions you've got, the better chance you have of getting a good project or good product. But if you write your story too early, again, you run into this danger of it not fitting the gameplay and things like that sometimes, because gameplay might change and alter, Anyway, it's a tough thing, and there's always that concern when you're doing audio work that it does fit well together. And I think we've all played games that we thought, well, that audio acting is, yeah. I mean, my personal philosophy about some of this stuff is and this is a whole nother question. I mean, I'd love to, and this is where today with metrics, it's a great thing. My personal thought is that a lot of people skip cinematics and skip story elements. That came from years ago when I think that they were kind of not so great. Now maybe because they're so much better today, people don't. But if people just buzz through them and don't even read them and don't even care about them, sometimes I sort of feel like, well, maybe it's not as important a part of the business as some people want it to be. But I honestly, it's one of those things where I don't know anymore. It's hard for me to know.
I think there's a large percentage of people who pick up the new Call of Duty but never even play the single play at all. There's some metric on how many people finish a game, a $60 game. It's like 20% or something. It's
wow.
really low. So there's a lot of stuff that remains unseen with that kind of game. Whereas if you make a simple game where you control each part of it, I mean, the way you talk about making a AAA game, it's like you're trying to shoot a movie and like invent a sport, all while like everyone's on tricycles and moving at the same time and have to like stay in conjunction with each other. Nobody falls off, and if one guy falls off, then you can't make your movie in the same way. And
it is. It's like I said, making games is a lot harder than people think it is at times, especially today, because of the big teams and all this. But the thing is, there's so many things that you just never think about that can go wrong, quote unquote. And sometimes it's as small a thing as some guy meets a girl and decides to get married, and suddenly he's telling you, well, I need 2 weeks of a honeymoon right at Alpha. And you're like, oh, you're kidding me. You're getting married right then? And, you find out, well, it's because who knows, maybe he has to get married right then. I don't know. But,
sure.
All of this planned stuff comes up in every project, and how well you can deal with it and how quickly you can dance has to do with budget and people and talent, and but that's what makes the business fun and what makes it fascinating, and it's why I love doing what I do. It's because it's constantly changing, it's constantly a new thing, and it's always having to be prepared for the unexpected, and I like to think that I've seen enough of the weird stuff happen and problems come through that there's very little that, like, somebody comes up and tells me, well, we got to do this and this and this, because of X, Y, and Z. And it's like, I like to think I'm pretty well, like, prepared for most of it. But, yeah, it's tough. It's always a tough business,
I'd imagine. So many variables. Is that part of what attracted you to going on your own and doing smaller projects with Carried Away Games? And we should talk about which of those projects people could look into, if there's stuff on the horizon, if there's stuff out now they could find that you're working on currently.
Well, yeah, so, the thing that we're working on right now is we actually, and there's a ton of people, this actually could fill up a whole show too. We've decided to, go the modern route of, we're going to make a free-to-play game. It's a type of game that a lot of people dislike, or vocal people dislike. I do believe that there are a lot of people that are perfectly fine with it. And for us, like I've mentioned, the ultimate goal for us as a company is to try to make it so that we don't have to contract to make the things we like. And so we're still looking at doing a Kickstarter. I think the card you've got that I gave you at PAX mentioned a Kickstarter on there. We are still going to do a Kickstarter. When that takes off is kind of based on when we've got a good set of playable stuff that we can turn into a video, because that's the one thing with Kickstarter, is having a really good, tight video, I think, is a huge selling point. And we're probably, we're sort of crossing our fingers that we're within about 6 weeks of having that.
Oh, wow.
And Yeah, we're at the point where we're working on sort of the core game bit, which is the combat and the movement. And if we've got that to the point where it feels right and it looks the way we want it to, then we'll do a Kickstarter that, hopefully is primarily for getting people to step in and play like a closed beta with us, and to give us a lot of comments and feedback on this thing that we're making. But again, the other controversial thing I'm sure in a lot of people's minds is that we're actually making it for Facebook. I know that a lot of people consider Facebook a dead platform and stuff like that, but we don't actually believe that. I mean, things that we've seen and things that we look at as a market, it's a place that intrigues us. iOS, as much as mobile is a huge thing, it's kind of a secondary thing for us because it's so crowded. It's got so many people that are all trying to do everything one time in it. It makes us a bit nervous. And we've already released 3 games on iOS. And it's a tough market. It's hard to get noticed. But this was a lot of the stuff we did before. The Earthbound thing kind of turned into a bigger deal than I'd ever thought it would, which is great. Had this opportunity to talk about it, and so I wanted to actually thank you for this chance to sit and talk to you. Because it gives me a chance to tell people, that we've got a company and we're doing things. Yeah, I mean, you guys are great. I mean, the interest that you've had in Earthbound is fantastic, and then just the fact that you're even asking me about the stuff I do today is a great thing for me and the guys I work with. But I hope that some of this stuff we talk about is of interest to people too, because it is an interesting business and it is a lot of fun to do things that maybe other people don't do. And me picking Facebook makes it kind of a weird adventure, and hopefully people will find it kind of fun to be on the adventure with us. And but yeah, that's what we're doing. We're gonna go free to play on Facebook first. We're gonna try to hopefully branch out to mobile from there, and then who knows, go to platforms either potentially. I mean, PS4, Microsoft, they're a little more indie friendly today than they used to be. For us, working on that stuff is easy. I mean, we've worked on platforms forever. But it's a strategy that we're hoping will work out, and hopefully it'll be an interesting story for people to hear about along the way.
Absolutely. I imagine free to play, you're going to get more people playing your game without asking them for any money up front. Facebook, you've got a huge amount of people that are on there anyway, so you've got a platform that has a lot of a huge install base. So there's a lot to be done there, but it depends on how you go about it.
Yep.
And like you mentioned, if people get mad about the way you make your game, then that's bad.
Yeah.
But, they don't necessarily have to get mad. I am sad that it goes along with this whole marketing leading people to have a predisposition and a prejudgment on a game before it even comes out. Like, a $60 Grand Theft Auto game, it's got a 10 out of 10 already. A freemium Facebook game, I have to hate it before it even comes out. It's sad when those prejudgments leak into people's brains.
Yeah.
Because they love video games, but at the same time they also love being opinionated on the internet. And it is so easy to just latch onto those opinions and start ranting about them and having the internet be a game to you where you just get in arguments with people on Twitter just because it's a way to pass the time without really thinking through what you're talking about. But there's no reason why a game on Facebook that's free to play can't be a worthwhile experience. Could be fantastic.
Well, and that's the thing. We're not actually doing anything like a Zynga game or anything like that. We're actually making it more like a real game. It's not a first-person shooter or anything like that, because we don't really think that Facebook is the platform for that either. Even though there are a few successful ones that do it, but we're actually looking at doing it's a more like an RTS. It's a strategy game. It's got more in tune with StarCraft or something else than other things. I mean, it's got a lot of those classic elements, and it is a skill-based thing where at least you're moving units around and you're having to position yourself in a way that gives you an advantage over the enemy. and it is an RTS that you can play against AI enemies, or you can play against humans, and so it's sort of an MMORTS in a way. And we've got a couple of things that there's a twist in it that no one else has done, that we kind of cross our fingers and hope is the right thing, and we kind of want to. Some people say, oh, you should tell everybody about what you're doing, early on and all this kind of thing. And I'm not 100% behind doing all of that. I mean, we're going to let people know, especially if we do a Kickstarter, what the interesting bit is. But we hope that it's intriguing to people and they think, okay, at least give it a try, because it's something that it's the kind of thing where there's industry norms, and this kind of breaks one of the industry norms.
Huh.
So I'm not gonna come out and give it to you now. But I'll tell you what, if you have me back on and you do another show, I'll spill the beans.
That would be great. But for your sake, I would want it to be pretty close to when the game's actually coming out, because I have sadly seen so many Kickstarters gain all this attention and do pretty well for themselves, getting hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
But then it just goes quiet afterwards, and then the game actually comes out and people have already kind of moved on mentally. And the sales don't actually... so saving that really big hit of your twist for after the game is close to being out or even out is something it sounds like you're already planning on doing. And we've gone over time because I spaced out.
Sorry,
we're 5 minutes over time. That's not your fault. And there's 2 more questions. Maybe we can do these questions really quick. And
I'll try to be short. I'll be quick.
That's very kind of you. Thank you for making up for my mistakes. Premium asks, have you ever been approached for doing the localization work on Mother 3 by Nintendo? Oh, we did talk about that a little.
We did, and no, I haven't. No.
No, you have not. And Skippy3 asks, how do you feel about the fan translations of unlocalized games? I'm friends with ROM hackers and translators and wonder what a pro thinks of the scene. I don't know, other than Mados and others, he's got some help in his translation of Mother 3, whether you've looked into that scene all that much.
Well, the whole fan translation scene, I think, is a fantastic thing. I'm a little different game developer in that I am very fan oriented, and I look at the things that people do with video and stuff. I think it's fantastic. I love the fact that people talk about the game you work on and do that in whatever medium they want, whether it's video or blogs or whatever. And to have someone, care enough to do a fan translation, the only aspect of that for me is the only sticking point, and this is purely something for me. I don't want to make a value judgment for other people, but when it came to the Mother 3 thing, I didn't own a copy of Mother 3, and when I looked at the fan translation, I thought, oh, maybe I should just take a look at it and stuff. And the very first step, it says, go out and grab a ROM from wherever. They don't tell you where; they just say, go out and get yourself a ROM. And me being in the game community, for myself as a developer, it's just one of those things where I just don't go to where sites. It's just something I'm not comfortable doing myself. Other people do what they do, and I'm not going to worry about them. But for me to go out and go to the where sites, I just don't do it. And I think that some people don't understand that and stuff. But it's a personal thing for me. Like I said, I'm not going to tell other people not to do it. But for fan translations, I suppose it's probably necessary. And the ideal situation for me would be if I bought the game and then was able to apply a fan translation to it. That would be great, because I know the developer got compensated for the work and the effort they made. And that's the way that I would prefer to do things. But as a pure fan translation question, I think it's great. I think the fact that people put that much time and effort of their own free will into, the work that it takes to do this, I know is huge. It just shocks me that there are people that love this stuff so much. So I would be very supportive of people doing that kind of stuff. I think it's great that there are fans that do that kind of thing.
Yeah, as do I. And hopefully, as technology gets more and more accessible, it'll be more and more easy to just apply a patch to a bot version of your game. And I just wish Mother 3, if Nintendo just sold the ROM or whatever, sold it digitally, then people could apply the patch right there. It'd be interesting to see if they'd open up that way.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that there was some way that that things. I mean, I know that the whole question of piracy and stuff is a sensitive one, but I wish there was a way that for people that don't have the money to play something, could at the very least at the end of the game decide, okay, I at least throw the developer $1 or something, anything, just, or even if it's like sort of the humble indie bumble kind of thing or whatever it's called.
Oh, did we lose Marcus?
The things where people donate what they can or what they feel is right. Am I gone?
Oh, you're back.
Am I still here or am I gone?
You are here.
Am I back? Okay. Okay. So anyway, so for me, like I said, I am hugely supportive of people spending what they can or whatever. I mean, I think that it's great when groups do that kind of thing. So anyway, that's kind of how I feel about that whole thing. But fan translations, I think, are great.
Indeed. Marcus, thank you so much for being on the show. It was such a pleasure. We could have gone on all day, in my opinion. I still have hours of stuff to talk to you about. Hopefully we can have you on again in the future. That
would be great. I would love to. Like I said, I've worked too many places in some ways and seen too many weird things. I can talk about this stuff forever. So I appreciate your time, and again, thank you for having me on. I love the fact that you guys still care about Earthbound and think it's worth talking about all these years later. Sure do. And they can follow you at Carried Away Games on Twitter. And you've got a .com? We do. It's not been updated in a while. I need to start actually sitting down and dorking around with the internet more, like in terms of the website. But we're probably going to do a big rollout, prior to the Kickstarter of a new website and all this kind of thing. But the Twitter is at Carried Away Game without the S. Technically, that's the limit of characters was, it sucks. I wish they let one more character go, because otherwise it'd be at Carried Away Games. But yeah, absolutely. Please follow me, because I'll be putting up info and stuff like that over time. Exciting. I look forward to it. As for me, I'm at Tronauts on Twitter. The show, you can watch it later on YouTube. It's just Sup Holmes. You can look it up on Detoid's YouTube channel. Also on iTunes, you can subscribe to it and download it. Tell your friends. More people that check the show out, the better. People are, every day someone's like, oh, I finally watched your show. It's kind of good. Yeah. Like, whoa, thanks. Thanks for finally checking it out. I've been doing it for 2 years. I know. The fact that, 2 years is a crazy amount of time that you guys have been going at this. I hope that you keep going for a long time. This kind of stuff is great. And you guys that like I said, to me, the love of the games, love of the business is what comes through when you guys do this stuff. Thanks so much, Marcus. Likewise. Now we signal the Sinistar to end the show by waving goodbye. So goodbye. See ya. Thanks again.